atypical antipsychotics had a better affinity for serotonin 2A receptors compared to D2 receptors. And most, if not all, pharmaceutical industry were developing compounds with this profile. So nowadays, we used a lot of drugs that were accepted in the clinic because, of course, they were efficacious, but they were produced based on this profile. So how it could work? And most industry and also institutional and public laboratories were looking at the reason why blocking serotonin 2A receptor could ameliorate the efficacy of the blockade of D2 receptors, how it could work. Is it logical? I think it is. Again, it is based on the representation that we have about the way by which, I mean, an antipsychotic blocks or reduces schizophrenia. And one of the representation is that we should decrease dopamine transmission in the mesoaccumbens pathway. The antipsychotic, so here serotonin dopamine antipsychotic, should somehow block D2 receptors. This has to be kept. So, and maybe this is reinforced with this new class of drug. In the mesocortical, in the cortex, we should conversely increase dopamine so that if dopamine release is increased, it might reduce the blockade of dopamine by the neuroleptic, and then limit the blockade of the dopamine transmission in the cortex. In the nigrostriatal dopaminergic pathway, the ideal case should be that we increase also dopamine extracellular levels so that dopamine can compete with the neuroleptic on dopamine receptor and limit the dramatic side effects that occur after long-term administration. And in the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, the blockade of D2 receptors to avoid the excessive production of prolactin. So at the end, this is quite complicated because here we would like if you are going to the supermarket, we would like a decrease in dopamine transmission in the accumbens. We would like an increase of dopamine transmission in the cortex. We would like a sort of increased dopamine transmission in the pathway, and we would like to limit the blockade of dopamine D2 receptors in the pituitary gland. So And we would achieve this with serotonin 2A receptor blockade. It's a dream, but it's what is going on, because this is quite interesting. And first, I will start with the situation of the cortex. In the cortex, you have to understand that if you do on slices binding of D2 receptors, you will see a faint labeling. There are very few dopamine receptors, D2 and D1 receptors, to subcortical, especially striatum and nucleus accumbens. So, if you increase dopamine, maybe there is a chance that it will compete with antipsychotic. Here you have a microdialysis experiment in rats with a probe inserted in the cortex, in the medial MPF, in the medial prefrontal cortex. You have dopamine measured in dialysate, and this is a percent of basal levels. So the experiment here is quite particular because the authors report the overall percentage of baseline for the whole experiment, which was, I think, 2 hours or something like that. So it means 30 minutes, and then they combine all.
Tous les participants sont activés.
Good. So they combine all samples to give you only, and me, to give you only one value. So this is the average value for different doses. So here, saline administration or vehicle administration. Vehicle means that they use, no, not for haloperidol, but they inject also the solvent of the drug which was used to block serotonin 2A receptor, seeing this drug. So they measured dopamine stage of baseline plus or minus SEM for different doses of haloperidol, 0.01, 0.03, 0.1, 0.3, and 0.1. You have each time for instance, this group in black, maybe 5 to 8 animals per group. And so you have to see here that this is a big experiment. Here you have, for the black dot, 5 to 8 animals. Here 5 to 8 animals. Here 5 to 8, etc., etc., etc. I also point or stress the fact that they use a which is perfect. Why? Because it is absolutely necessary to do dose response curve. For instance, here you inject haloperidol in, we will see that later, but in the nucleus accumbens, not in the nucleus accumbens, but you measure dopamine in the nucleus accumbens or the striatum. The effect will be complete. So the effect of haloperidol is region dependent. If you inject 0.03, good, but this is not significant. 0, I mean to the corresponding control. So what does it mean? Because we know that in subcortical area it is. So you need to cover all the efficacious dose of haloperidol and where to stop. At what dose? They stopped at 1 milligram per kilogram, which is a really high dose, and behaviorally catalepsy. So, you see here haloperidol alone induce a small effect, I would say dose-dependent effect, but you see a sort of inverted U-shaped curve. I mean, when you increase the dose, you lose the efficacy of haloperidol. This is good pharmacology. I mean, the effect is well characterized and quite surprising compared to what we will see and what I have already shown before for subcortical areas. But here, this is good pharmacology and good characterization. Then, what? When you concomitantly block serotonin 2A receptors with a specific antagonist. I mean, the author block MDL, so here there is a group lacking. The group MDL. But in any case, in their article, they indicate that MDL was not effective to modulate dopamine extracellular levels alone. But in combination with haloperidol, you see that MDL potentiates the ability of haloperidol to increase dopamine release. And really interestingly, first doses of haloperidol and not the high doses. So it goes in the hypothesis in that probably block dopamine receptor in the cortex, but if we concomitantly block serotonin 2A receptors, there is an increase in dopamine extracellular levels which can compete with the neuroleptic on dopamine receptors. Then, what is the situation accumbens? In the nucleus accumbens, we know that dopamine D2 receptors are highly expressed. So here they went at 0.1 milligram per kilogram and 1 milligram per kilogram. So the in-between doses were not reported. As expected, the black curve, this is haloperidol alone. The black curve indicates that with haloperidol alone you can increase dopamine extracellular levels by twofold or in between 2 and 3-fold, and this is exactly what I showed you in the it was my experiment, but this is almost the same. And at 1 milligram per kilogram, you have almost the same. This is almost the same effect. And what is interesting here is that if you look at the white blockade of serotonin 2A receptor reduces the effect of haloperidol on dopamine extracellular levels, which means that the neuroleptic, I mean the atypical neuroleptic, would be where there is less competition in dopamine, so that the blockade and the occupancy of D2 receptor can be increased in the presence of serotonin. So you decrease the competitor, so more place for the antipsychotic to bind. It would go toward an increase of D2 receptor occupancy in the nucleus accumbens. For the nigrostriatal dopamine pathway, then we looked at the effect, and first, behaviorally, we measured catalepsy. So rats were 1 milligram per kilogram, and we measured the duration of catalepsy in seconds. So remember, catalepsy is of a rat to withdraw from an uncomfortable position. Basically, you just put or a grid, and the rat is positioned on this, and if it cannot move from this uncomfortable position, it means that he is not able to develop any motor plan, and so we just measure the duration of immobility. And there is a cutoff of 5 minutes. It has been measured at 1, 2, 3, and 4 hours after haloperidol administration. A strong catalepsy induced by haloperidol, at least at 2 hours. If you have a saline-treated rat, but with neuroleptic, you have strong time of important time of catalepsy. And then we how can I say this? We pre-treat the animals with ritoncerin, which is a non-selective blocking agent of serotonin 2 receptor. Serotonin 2A receptors. It can also block serotonin 2B and 2C, whatever. And dependent reduction of the duration of catalepsy with ritoncerin, something almost complete reduction, at least at 2 or 3 after haloperidol injection. So we had the context with a reduction of, maybe it was related to a further enhancement of dopamine release induced by a situation analogous in the cortex, for instance, which would explain why in clinic, if you give ritonserine plus haloperidol, you get rid of extrapyramidal side effects. Unfortunately, we saw nothing. The same rats. Without going too much into the details, ritonserine by itself, here the gray curve, is not efficacious in release. So it's like solvent. Haloperidol, here, as already shown, increase dopamine release in the striatum. It is almost like in the nucleus accumbens. And then, in the presence of ritonserine, efficacious to reduce or even prevent catalepsy, we saw exactly extracellular levels of dopamine, which means that the reduction of catalepsy induced by ritonserine is with an increase in dopamine release in the striatum, which means that Parkinsonism, etc., is not associated to somehow dopamine release in the striatum. And we had later the confirmation. This is remarkable, but again, complicated for you. So, what it is? This is simply binding. Okay. In humans. Binding in humans with different drugs, haloperidol, olanzapine. They have been administered at different doses. So this is huge studies, you see. So, and after that, what do the authors? For each dose, they are trying to measure the occupancy of either receptors in some studies and serotonin 2 receptors in parallel study. So I don't know, you have 10 patients treated at 2 milligrams per kilogram of haloperidol. So will be studied for D2 receptors, 5 of them will be studied for serotonin 2 receptors. Basically, so here 2 and here 1 milligram. Basically, you inject, so these are PET studies. You inject, for instance, radio-labeled raclopride in humans. Raclopride, which receptors bind in the striatum, and then, knowing this, you inject haloperidol and you see the reduction of raclopride binding. And compared to normal, you can estimate the percentage occupancy of haloperidol at the expense of raclopride binding. You understand? So this is displacement, but in humans. And you do the same for another drug targeting serotonin. Something. So, the estimation of receptor. There are two other elements in this slide for each part. The first one is the blue here. For each compound. And the blue corresponds to the minimal regimen efficacious to treat schizophrenia. Below, you won't have. And then there are two lines. The green lines corresponds to the hypothetic lines that have been found several times in several studies. And this is the lower percentage occupancy at which you can expect to have an antipsychotic effect. So and corresponds to the graphic, to the relationship, the linear relationship that I showed you before from Seemann. I mean, why 75%? We need in between 65 and 80% occupancy of D2 receptors. We did not know before this study. Okay? So the threshold is antipsychotics. So for regimen that are lower than the normal regimen given in clinic, for instance, 1 milligram per day for haloperidol, 5 milligram per day for olanzapine, and here 2 milligram per day for risperidone. Here we have occupancy of but this is not sufficient to reach the. So it confirms that this threshold might be important. And regarding serotonin 2 receptors, in any case, it is almost new, which confirms that haloperidol has poor affinity for serotonin 2 receptors. Then, what is going on? If you administer 2 milligrams per day, you can expect 70% occupancy of D2 receptors. And if you are administering 5 milligrams per day, you can expect 90%. Here, you induce extrapyramidal side effects. So, it means, if you look at this, it means that you can have a sort of ideal situation where haloperidol could be given efficacious without and in fact haloperidol is quite good compound. The problem is that you cannot do PET studies every week or every 3 days. So depending on the alimentation, depending on, I don't know if you take another pill, etc., it can modify the percentage pharmacokinetic. And this, the physician cannot really appreciate because this is the patient. The pharmacokinetic characteristics of haloperidol, its way of action, and its the body. One day 2 milligram, another day, etc. You could slightly go over 80% after some time. And then, so this is not really comfortable, but this is a good compound. Still, typical neuroleptic. So, the atypical neuroleptic olanzapine, and this starts to be really interesting. When we see here that olanzapine is administered at lower dose compared to the normal regimen, it fails to block sufficiently that's good, but look at the percentage occupancy of serotonin 2 receptors. This is over 90%. So we know that at that dose, so that dose of 5 milligrams per kilogram, olanzapine is not antipsychotic. So it means that blockade of serotonin 2A receptors, almost full here, is not an antipsychotic possibility. Blockade of receptors is not antipsychotic by itself. And you know what? It just confirms the clinical data showing that, for instance, M10907, which was used in the treatment of schizophrenia in humans, because it is selective blocker antagonist of serotonin 2A receptor, this compound failed to display antipsychotic efficacy. So this here, this data with olanzapine confirm that almost full blockade of serotonin 2A receptors is not antipsychotic per se. And okay, we don't know about the D2 receptor and the interaction with. So, at the threshold dose regimen, something like 10 milligrams per kilogram, olanzapine go 65% occupancy, maybe 70%. And so this is the ideal situation, and we have almost 100 blockade of serotonin 2A receptors. But here no side effects normally. I mean, no extrapyramidal side effects. Then you see that it can protect a little bit, because if you inject 15 and 20 milligram, you still are in the good window, in the good therapeutic window, in between 65 and 80. And then with higher doses, you go over the threshold of 60 and in fact, olanzapine can induce extrapyramidal side effects. So it can induce at this excessive side effects in a situation where serotonin 2 receptors are totally occluded. 100%. What does it mean? It means simply that the blocking serotonin 2A receptors protect against extrapyramidal side effects. So that it was a concept in the beginning of the and it's wrong. And if you look at risperidone, we have the same profile. You can increase from 2 to 6 milligrams per day the dose, and you are the therapeutic window. Yet you reach almost maximal serotonin 2A receptor occupancy. And I can tell you several studies have shown that if you administer 8 milligrams per day, then you develop serious extrapyramidal side effects. I can tell you also that for olanzapine or risperidone, so this is good because you don't have this extrapyramidal side effect, but if you look at the patient after months of treatment, and even if you are in the therapeutic window, you can see sometimes some small movement of the or something. This is smooth. This is not totally normal. And then for most of these drugs, you have another problem, which is akathisia, sort of restless syndrome. Dopamine hypothesis of atypical antipsychotic is what? So you see we are moving. First D2 receptors, then D2 receptors, but apparently it does not explain the atypicity of antipsychotic drugs. Then we have to move. We have to move for another hypothesis, and then people went back, but they were always with pharmacological profile of clozapine in mind, but this is complicated. And for those of you who are aware and open to system medicine, here you have found you can see that clozapine, this is clozapine. I told you. Drug acting at several targets at the same time. So, found serotonin 2A receptors, but it was in 1989, and at that time we did not know 6 serotonin 7 receptors, and I don't know, it was not clear for serotonin 1A, so people were prisoners of one hypothesis. And then this hypothesis was questionable several years later, 20 years later. So what do we do? What do we do? How can we superiority of olanzapine, risperidone, clozapine compared to chlorpromazine to produce drugs. And there was hypothesis in starting something like I don't know, 1980, 98, 2000, and you will understand. So the atypicity, this is a third hypothesis, it could be related to the affinity of the neuroleptic toward dopamine D2 receptors. So how can we imagine that the affinity simply be the main hypothesis? Remember, so after that, KD is K minus 1 on K1, and it corresponds to LR on LR plus R. So, KD, since K1, the constant of association for all neuroleptics, because the drugs are similar, so if you but the difference is the dissociation. So for instance, the drug binds and stick on the receptor. This is high affinity, and then dissociate. Or you have drugs that bind on the receptor and dissociate, like this. You understand? And this is not the same. This is not the same because if you have a low KD, it means that the dissociation is fast. And this is a situation for clozapine. No. Low KD, I mean high KD but low affinity, and here which means high affinity. And this is a case of haloperidol. And what is the consequence? The consequence, this is an hypothesis. You can see on the left part, okay? Hypothesis. The mechanism of action of memantine for blocking NMDA receptors compared to ketamine or I don't know. If you inject haloperidol with the low KD, so the very high affinity, you a poor dissociation. 65% occupancy, and then something is going on in the environment leading to an increase in the levels of dopamine. The problem its constant of dissociation is fast, I mean the kinetic is low, so that it sticks on the receptor, and this surge, hypothetical surge of dopamine, cannot remove haloperidol from D2 receptors. So it's almost like this. And when we speak about the psychomotor indifference of typical neuroleptics, I can tell you that, but they have difficulties to answer to this. And you can see also reduction of activity of the face, like marble. Stone. It does not move a lot. You can express something with your face. It is more difficult for patients treated with typical neuroleptics, and sometimes also atypical neuroleptics. So a sort of distance with what is going on in their environment. And the situation of clozapine, here still hypothetic. There will be, of course, 65% occupancy because it is needed. But then, in case of surge of dopamine, the dopamine could more easily compete with clozapine on dopamine receptors, so that you dampen, you reduce the blockade of the system, would be more rest. You understand? So this is a good hypothesis. It parallels memantine on NMDA receptors. The problem, and I told you in the very beginning of this hypothesis, so this hypothesis dampens the idea that we need a blockade of dopamine transmission. Okay? Because the dissociation is fast, and you understand why I spoke about correcting monoamine. Because at the end we don't block we don't fully block dopamine transmission with. We have 65%, maybe 75%, but in case of there would be a sort of relief of the system, allowing the patient to answer the system, in contrast to haloperidol, chlorpromazine, flupentixol, which blocks dopamine receptor, and it is extremely difficult for dopamine to compete with typical antipsychotic. Okay? Nice idea, but it failed. It failed because that have very high affinity for D2 receptors, less or like which behave like haloperidol, and in fact psychotics. And I think this is a case of drugs like olanzapine, for instance. Olanzapine has a strong affinity for dopamine receptor, or ziprasidone and something like that, while other drugs can be typical neuroleptic but have less affinity for dopamine receptors compared to haloperidol or chlorpromazine. So this is not the right hypothesis, but an hypothesis is not ever a law. An hypothesis has to be confirmed or improved. So here it is not this hypothesis 3, but it allows something else. Instead of blocking dopamine transmission, antipsychotic drugs might correct dopamine transmission. And this is a new way of understanding dopamine and dopamine targets in the treatment of schizophrenia. So what are the new strategies? Whatever we do, it looks like we need to block D2 receptors. I hope you were convinced by the data of Seeman and the linear regression showing a perfect match between the affinity and the free concentration of neuroleptic used in clinic. So it looks like, it is the mainstream how can I say, requirement for producing new antipsychotic. The new antipsychotic like olanzapine, risperidone, ziprasidone induce fewer extrapyramidal side effects. I said fewer, not no, but fewer, and this is perfect. However, this second generation of antipsychotic has a metabolic side effect. So they induce metabolic syndrome toward obesity, and this is the case of olanzapine and risperidone. So olanzapine is a good antipsychotic. some patients, after weeks or months of treatment, something like 40 kilograms. Yes. So there is a sort of diabetes with this kind of drugs. So the second generation, okay, what we gain somewhere on extrapyramidal side effects, we lose elsewhere for the metabolic syndrome. So we are looking at the third generation. We don't know. I mean, I send a link that you should have a look. This is basically the story of antipsychotic. And we have nowadays three things: positive symptoms, negative symptoms, and cognitive impairment. So at least 3 dimensions in schizophrenia, and we have to avoid extrapyramidal side which are in fact disconnected from the other one, and metabolic side effects. So we increase the number of criteria. So maybe we could look at something else. So here this is just an example of what we can do. And it is easy for me to think about this field of research, but you have a lot of other possibilities, targets which are studied like this, and you have seen also at the occasion of a neurotransmitter system that sometimes people were speaking about schizophrenia with systems or neurotensin. It has been a long time that people were thinking and considering the possibility to act on neurotensin receptors. Here is one possibility: serotonin 2C receptor agonist. Why? They inhibit the activity of mesoaccumbens dopamine pathway. They are anti-obesity pills. So this lorcaserin, it was in one synthesis, has been accepted by the FDA, the Food and Registration, I don't know, administration, bon, whatever. Lorcaserin by the FDA as anti-obesity pill. I think not in Europe. I don't know. And atypical antipsychotic are serotonin 2C antagonists, which is not really a good point, but the excessive weight gain induced by these drugs could be related to the blockade of serotonin 2C receptors. So there was some studies, and here you have a preclinical evaluation in animal models predictive of antipsychotic efficacy and motor side effects. So for instance, locomotor activity, agonists reduce basal locomotor activity, reduce locomotor activity induced by amphetamine, cocaine, etc., etc., without inducing catalepsy and other problems. So, okay, we might consider serotonin 2C agonist as potential treatment in schizophrenia. I mean, it cannot be worse compared to other preclinical drugs. And then one of these drugs, vibacanserine, was used, and curiously, it improved schizophrenia compared to placebo. So it means that it was significantly different compared to placebo, but it was not more efficacious compared to olanzapine at the primary end point of the study. But, of course, the study and the clinical study did not find extrapyramidal side effects and no increase in body weight compared to olanzapine. So it means that it could be some strategy, you see? And since schizophrenia is a complex disease, I think so, as I said in the beginning, one patient, one schizophrenia. And several dimensions as altered. So you have delirium, which is a little bit cognition, but something else. You have symptoms. You have negative symptoms, which in fact are probably unrelated. It was a historical problem. Do we induce negative symptoms with typical neuroleptics? And in fact, probably no. Probably it is fingerprint of the disease. But it depends on the individuals. So, which becomes, and we have, so negative symptoms and cognitive dimension, and probably something else. The combination of these dimensions gives you the pathology for one patient. So this is complicated. And maybe this is why serotonin 2A receptor blockade is something which acts on cognitive dimension. Even receptors, it is better for cognitive dimension. But no way that blocking of serotonin 2A receptors protect against extrapyramidal side effects. So, if you have a schizophrenic patient with cognitive defect, then the use of atypical antipsychotic based on serotonin 2A D2 can be effective and could be more efficacious. But if you have a schizophrenic patient with more negative symptoms, then so I start here. I did not report the lead disease for negative symptoms nowadays, but here do you mean that each type?
He said that, do you mean that each type of symptoms of schizophrenic needs a special target?
And a special target for each dimension of schizophrenia? I think this is more complicated because some targets overlap. receptor, and it could be good for positive symptoms, but some positive symptoms, something like that. I'm not sure all positive symptoms, and it could be good also for cognition, because whatever the issue, cognition is not only restored by serotonin 2A antagonist. So I think the real interaction occurs in this dimension. Dopamine D2 and serotonin 2A. Then negative symptoms, which is we don't know where it occurs, like the other ones anyway, but where exactly, so we don't know. What we know is that the third generation of antipsychotics, and I will speak about a little bit of that, the third generation is D2 antagonist but also partial agonist. Is blocking D3 receptors. It is blocking either serotonin 2A receptors or activating A receptors, which basically gives also the same result. Don't know why. It is also blocking serotonin 2B receptors. You imagine serotonin 2B receptors were not considered 15 years ago in the brain. So, the idea would be D2 for positive symptoms, serotonin 2A, D3, maybe D2 for cognitive defect, and maybe blockade of dopamine D3 for negative symptoms. And the drugs, but this is not clear, the drugs which are summarizing almost everything are cariprazine and aripiprazole. So aripiprazole was at the origin of the third hypothesis because it is not a real blocker of a real antagonist. It has some weak partial agonist activity at D2 and D3 receptors. And cariprazine, the same. Cariprazine being the last accepted antipsychotic drug in the market. So, with this kind of drug, and we of course, I would say in French, cahier des charges, so in the charge that we need to consider, of do not have affinity for H1, alpha 1, M1, to avoid the historical neuroleptics. And it should be also interesting that those compounds so, for instance, it's not good if they have a strong affinity for serotonin 2C receptors, or if they block serotonin 2C receptors. So this is complicated. We don't have all the elements. A lot of people are interested by by acetylcholine. For instance, maybe clozapine is efficacious against positive symptoms, cognitive defect, but lower on negative symptoms because clozapine blocks also some cholinergic receptors. So every people are looking, and at the end, it looks like to have a good antipsychotic, it needs to block several distinct targets. So either you use different drugs, but at the end this is difficult to manage in terms of pharmacokinetic purpose and can induce liver problems, and so maybe in one drug. So this is called multi-target drugs because schizophrenia cannot be understood only in the prism of only one target. And that's it. So do you have some questions?
Monsieur, est-ce qu'on peut répondre en français dans l'examen?
Oh, this is another question. The answer is why not? Yes.
Thank you, teacher.
I'm not here to evaluate your English. But you can evaluate mine.
No, teacher, no.
We are in no position to evaluate anyone's English.
Okay. So, have questions on antipsychotics? Was it clear? At the end, we know nothing. You understood this?
Yes, teacher. It's a research part.
And this is typical research in neuropharmacology.
Yes.
So, we see each other tomorrow. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You too.